Known as one of the darkest figures in history, Josef Stalin ruled the Soviet Union with an extraordinary reign. From the late 1920s, when Stalin came to power, the dictator who profoundly influenced Soviet society and world politics is remembered for great industrial breakthroughs and painful repression. His story is a journey of energy, cruelty, and decisions that changed the course of history. Are you ready to discover Stalin's rise from childhood to the top of the Soviet Union and everything in between? Stalin's rise to leadership was one of the most violent periods of power struggles within the Bolshevik Party after the Russian Revolution. Especially after Lenin's death, Stalin struggled with both ideological rivals and power centers within the party. In this process, he displayed his skills as a strong political operator and quickly rose to the party leadership. But this process left deep scars on his personality. Stalin took ruthless and decisive steps to gain power, and in the process demonstrated his readiness to eliminate anyone he considered an enemy. One of Stalin's most prominent traits during his leadership was his paranoid behavior. His policies of searching for political enemies and purges led to a wave of terror in the Soviet Union. Stalin believed that to maintain his power, it was necessary to eliminate any danger, and this belief led to the spread of widespread repression and fear in society. By shaping the political atmosphere in this way, he fomented fear and suspicion within the party and society at large. This caused the Stalin era to deeply scar the Soviet Union and to have a lasting impact on society for many years. Stalin's so-called Great Purge was one of the darkest and most repressive times in the history of the Soviet Union. It took place between 1936 and 1938 and was a large-scale political cleansing movement initiated by Stalin to purge dissidents, potential rivals, and enemies within the party and society. During this period, Stalin used intense repression and terror to remove anyone he considered an enemy from their positions within the state and party, and even have them killed. The Great Purge created a climate of fear and insecurity in Soviet society. People were threatened with arrest, torture, or execution at any moment. Every segment of society, from neighbors to colleagues, lived in fear of being watched and denounced. This greatly undermined public morale and confidence. The effects of the Great Purge on the Soviet army and bureaucracy were also profound. Many commanders and officers were purged from the army. This severely affected the capabilities and readiness of the army and is thought to have adversely affected the military performance of the Soviet Union during World War II. The purge within the bureaucracy aimed to create a structure within the party that was loyal to Stalin, but the efficiency and decision-making processes of the bureaucracy were also negatively affected in the process. The long-term consequences of the Great Purge created a deep trauma in Soviet society. Stalin's repressive rule and political purges led to a culture of fear and a period of political instability that lasted for many years. This period had a profound impact on the social structure and political culture of the post-Stalin Soviet Union and is still debated. During the Second World War, Stalin made a series of strategic decisions that determined the fate of the Soviet Union. These decisions directly affected the course and outcome of the war and played a critical role in the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. One of Stalin's most important decisions was his defensive strategy in the face of Germany's attack on the Soviet Union. When Operation Barbarossa began, Stalin quickly restructured the Soviet army and tightened its defensive lines. He organized retreats to protect strategically important points and made Soviet defense lines resistant to the German advance. These decisions enabled the Soviets to resist the German advance in the early stages of the war. Stalin's leadership played a decisive role during the war. He directed the Soviet war economy to organize and coordinate the country's war effort. He exercised direct control over military strategies and coordinated the operations of the Soviet army. He also set the strategic objectives of the war, ensuring that the Soviet Union followed a coherent strategy throughout the war. Stalin's strategic moves were crucial at turning points in the war. In strategic victories such as the Battle of Stalingrad, his decisions boosted Soviet morale and halted the advance of the German armies. He also successfully used defensive positions, such as the Battle of Kursk, to strengthen resistance to German advances. In conclusion, Stalin's leadership and strategic decisions during the Second World War strengthened the Soviet Union's resistance throughout the war and was one of the factors that ultimately led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. However, the war was also won at a high cost and had a profound impact on Soviet society. During his rule of the Soviet Union, Stalin implemented large-scale economic reforms and social policies. These policies radically transformed the economic structure of the country and had a profound impact on Soviet society. One of the most important of Stalin's economic policies was the collectivization policy. This policy aimed to eliminate private property in agriculture, establish collective farms, and bring agricultural production under state control. However, it encountered great difficulties and resistance in its implementation. In the process of collectivization, peasants were forcibly expelled from their villages, agricultural production was disorganized, and there were periods of famine. Although this policy led to serious problems in agricultural production, it strengthened Stalin and financed his industrialization efforts. To strengthen the economic infrastructure, Stalin initiated compulsory industrialization programs called five-year plans. These plans were designed to increase the country's industrial capacity and centrally manage the economy. Factories, mines, and infrastructure projects were greatly expanded. However, workers' rights and working conditions were severely neglected, working conditions were harsh and production targets made human life difficult. Stalin's social policies also had a profound impact on social life. Political dissidents, artists, and thought leaders were repressed, censored, and imprisoned. Under totalitarian rule, individual freedoms were limited and the public's thoughts and behavior were controlled through propaganda. These policies created a deep atmosphere of fear and mistrust in Soviet society. As a result, Stalin's economic and social policies transformed the Soviet Union into a superpower, while at the same time causing great human costs and social trauma. Today, the scars of the Stalin era are still felt and debated in Russia and the former Soviet countries. Stalin skillfully used strategies to present himself as a hero and savior to the Soviet people, creating a cult of his own. He made effective use of propaganda tools and touted his leadership as decisive for the fate of the Soviet Union. By defining himself as the natural continuation of Lenin's revolutionary legacy, he gained great respect and admiration among the population. He was often referred to with titles such as Great Leader and Hero of the People, and his myths and legends became widespread. Stalin's cult was used to consolidate his authoritarian rule and absolute control over society. He was portrayed as a leader who would not tolerate negative criticism of him. Through propaganda posters, statues, songs, and books, Stalin's leadership and personality became part of the everyday life of the population. Stalin's personality cult was promoted by the state to legitimize his leadership and reinforce ideological loyalty. However, the de-Stalinization process that began in the Soviet Union after Stalin's death profoundly affected his cult and legacy. New leaders began to criticize the repressive policies and human rights violations of the Stalin era. Stalin's myths, statues, and names were removed, and propaganda materials were destroyed or replaced. Stalin's cult was gradually erased from public memory and the official historical narrative. However, Stalin's legacy is still debated and deeply imprinted in the memory of societies. In conclusion, Stalin's cult and legacy had long-lasting effects on Soviet society. Both during his leadership and after his death, Stalin's propagandist strategies and totalitarian rule evoked both admiration and fear and earned him an unforgettable place in the history of the Soviet Union. Finally, Stalin's leadership was full of power struggles, paranoid attitudes, and dark periods such as the Great Purge. While his strategic victories in the Second World War demonstrated his leadership abilities, the deep scars he left on society and his repressive rule are unforgettable. Although the de-Stalinization process that began after Stalin's death tried to erase his legacy, the traces of his dictatorship still live on in the memory of societies. Stalin is both a hero and a tyrant on the stage of history, and his story is a journey full of lessons for humanity.